Ethan's heart stopped when his headlights fell upon the dark shape by the roadside. A frail German shepherd, battered and soaked, lay motionless in the rain. But then the dog lifted its head, staring straight into Ethan's eyes. A single name escaped his lips, Scout. It couldn't be. Ethan knelt slowly, the storm pouring round him. But he couldn't look away from the dog's eyes. There was no fear, no aggression, only recognition. The name Scout slipped from his mouth, and the dog's tail gave a faint, hopeful wag. 15 years had passed, yet nothing had changed. Ethan Brooks, a man in his mid-30s, had long left behind the small, quiet town of Jackson, Wyoming. He had grown up in a family defined by tradition and expectation, a family whose name carried weight in the community. But after the tragic death of his parents in a car crash when he was just 21, Ethan had escaped the small town, the pressure of legacy, and the unspoken grief were all too much to bear. So he left. He built a life in the city, far from the memories of his childhood. He thought he had put the past behind him, his parents' sudden deaths, the questions that never had answers, and the dog he had once loved, Scout. Scout had disappeared in the chaos of that time, and the family had told him he was gone, leaving Ethan to believe he was just another casualty of the tragedy. Also, he thought, Ethan's return to Jackson wasn't supposed to be anything more than business. A simple trip to resolve an old land dispute, settle a few papers, and leave. But as his truck rolled down the familiar Route 89, the weight of the town pressed on him once again. The towering mountains, the thick pine air, even the rain that pelted against his windshield, everything was a reminder of his past. Every mile felt like he was driving through memories, once he had locked away for years, as he turned a corner. The headlights caught something strange ahead, a dark shape, unmoving. His heart skipped. At first, he thought it was just debris from the storm. But then, the figure shifted, a dog, soaked and frail, lying at the edge of the road. Ethan slowed the truck, his hands trembling. He didn't know why he stopped, but he couldn't bring himself to drive past. Something about the dog made him feel like fate had brought him here. Ethan stepped out of the truck, the rain pounding against his shoulders as he approached the dog. The world round him seemed to blow only the faint sound of the storm. The dog's shallow breathing filled the air. The German shepherd lay motionless, its fur matted with dirt and rain. As he knelt beside the dog, Ethan's heart twisted. The dog's ribs were visible, the sharp contours a painful reminder of neglect and abandonment. Yet, when their eyes met, something changed. The world seemed to stand still. There was no fear, no instinct to flee. The dog's gaze was different. It was almost familiar. It was recognition, not from the mind, but from the heart, Scout. Ethan whispered, almost to himself. The name tumbled out before he could stop it. A name from his childhood, one he hadn't spoken in over a decade. The dog's tail, frail and weak, twitched in response. Ethan froze. His pulse quickened. This couldn't be real. Scout had been gone for so long. How could this be possible? Ethan sat there, frozen. As the rain poured relentlessly round them, the dog, now clearly struggling to keep his eyes open, shifted slightly but didn't move away. Ethan's thoughts raced. Could it really be Scout? It didn't make sense. 15 years had passed. Scout couldn't have survived this long. Yet, the connection between them was undeniable, the way Scout's eyes met his, as though the years hadn't passed at all, made his heart ache. He didn't know why he felt compelled to act, but the decision came without hesitation, gently. He slipped off his jacket and draped it over Scout's trembling body. Ethan carefully lifted the dog into his arms, cradling him like he had when they were young. Scout's body felt fragile. His ribs pressed painfully against Ethan's chest. But there was something comforting in the contact, something that stirred deep within him. Without another thought, Ethan walked back to the truck, opened the passenger door, and placed Scout in the seat. The dog didn't resist, only gazed quietly out the window as Ethan started the engine. Where was this road leading? Ethan didn't know, but he couldn't leave Scout behind. Not now. Not after all these years. The drive into Jackson felt like an endless stretch of pavement and memories. Ethan's hands tightened round the steering wheel, his mind grappling with the strange sense of déjà vu. The town hadn't changed much, small, quiet, and nestled between the jagged peaks of the mountains. But for Ethan, it felt suffocating. Each corner he turned, each familiar building he passed, brought with it an old wound. A part of his past he had buried deep. Jackson was never just a town to Ethan, it was home. But it was also the place where his life had been torn apart. 15 years ago, it had been a peaceful, simple place. Then came the crash, the accident that took his parents away from him. The police reports, the funeral, the endless condolences from people he hardly knew. The town mourned. But for Ethan, the grief was too much to carry. So he left. He fled to the city, cutting all ties to this place that had once been his world. But now, as he approached the familiar roads, the weight of it all returned. The house he grew up in was just up ahead, yet it felt like a stranger's home. Overgrown weeds choked the driveway, the windows were boarded up, and the front door hung crooked on its hinges. His childhood home, the place where Scout used to run round, was nothing more than a hollow shell. Ethan swallowed hard, trying to ignore the lump in his throat. He parked the truck, gazing at the house. What had really happened to Scout? Ethan checked into the old roadside lodge, the kind that hadn't seen renovations in decades, but still held a certain charm. The wooden beams, the scent of pine and stale coffee, the quiet hum of the heating system all felt oddly familiar. It was as if the lodge had frozen in time, just like the memories of his childhood. He didn't plan on staying long, but when he walked into the room, the first thing he did was set Scout down by the baseboard heater, wrapping him in the damp jacket. The dog was exhausted, his breathing shallow but steady. Ethan sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the faint steam rising from Scout's fur. There was an unspoken bond between them now, something deeper than just man and dog. It was as though Scout had been waiting all these years to reconnect with him. And in some way, Ethan had been waiting too. The storm outside had slowed to a drizzle, but the silence in the room felt thick, almost suffocating. Ethan glanced down at the dog, who was still staring at the heater, his tail twitching occasionally. Scout hadn't eaten anything, though Ethan had placed food and water beside him. He wasn't sure if it was out of pain or the weight of all those years of abandonment. Ethan sighed and sat back. There were too many questions, too many things left unsaid. Why was Scout here? Why now? And why had no one ever told him the truth about what happened the next morning? Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. He had woken up early, unable to sleep, his mind tangled in a web of questions. The rain had stopped, leaving behind a damp, heavy air that seemed to cling to the town. After checking on Scout, who was still curled up near the heater, Ethan decided to take a trip to the local veterinary clinic. Dr. Caroline Foster, a woman he remembered from his childhood, still worked there. She had known his family, and Ethan hoped she could shed some light on Scout's mysterious reappearance. Dr. Foster's clinic was small, tucked between two aging storefronts. The moment she saw Ethan, a faint, puzzled expression crossed her face. She didn't recognize him at first. But when he explained the situation, how he had found Scout lying on the side of the road, her face softened. There was hesitation in her eyes, as if she knew something but didn't want to say it. After a brief examination, she confirmed what Ethan feared. Scout was old, possibly around 14 or 15, and his health was poor. His bones were fragile, his coat matted and thin. But the vet also pointed out something Ethan hadn't considered. Scout had a collar, though it had been worn down over the years, with a faint inscription on it. Barkley. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. Barkley. The name meant nothing to him, but it was a place near 50 miles away. The revelation stirred something deep within him. Why had Scout been in Barkley? Why had he been so far from Jackson? The more Ethan dug, the more he realized that this wasn't just a reunion, it was the beginning of something far more complicated. Ethan's mind raced as he drove back to the lodge. Barkley. The name gnawed at him, pulling at something in his gut. He needed answers, and he knew where to find them at home, with the people who should have known the truth. He couldn't shake the feeling that the town, his family, and the people he trusted had been hiding something about Scout's disappearance. His first stop was his uncle, Martin. Martin was the last person in the family who had always seemed to hold things together, a pillar of the community. He had been Ethan's father's closest business partner, and someone who, in Ethan's memory, had always been calm and collected. But today, there was a strange tension when Ethan brought up the dog. Scout was gone after the accident, Martin said, avoiding Ethan's gaze as they sat across from each other at the kitchen table of the old family home. But something in his tone didn't sit right with Ethan. We thought it was best to move on, Martin continued, his words to rehearsed. Ethan wasn't convinced. You didn't just move on, Martin. Ethan said sharply. You hid the truth. Why didn't anyone tell me Scout was alive? Why did I think he was gone? The anger that had been brewing in Ethan's chest for years now bubbled to the surface. Martin shifted in his seat, and for a moment, Ethan saw a flicker of guilt in his uncle's eyes. I wasn't sure how you'd handle it, Martin admitted, his voice faltering. It was easier to say he was gone. After everything that happened, Ethan stared at him, the weight of betrayal sinking deeper. Martin's avoidance, the refusal to tell him the truth, something about this wasn't adding up. Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that there was something deeper at play. His uncle's admission had stirred more questions than answers, and he couldn't move forward without uncovering the full truth. He knew what he had to do: return to the old storage unit. The storage unit had always been a place of avoidance in Ethan's life. It was where his parents had kept things they didn't want to deal with, or perhaps things that had been too painful to face after their death. It had remained sealed and touched. Ethan had barely given it a second thought, but today he felt a strange pull toward it. As he approached the rusted metal door, his hands trembled slightly. The familiar scent of dust and decay greeted him as he unlocked the unit. Inside, the clutter of old furniture, boxes, and forgotten relics from his childhood overwhelmed him. He began sifting through the piles of things, old receipts, letters, and photos, until something caught his eye. A dented green metal cabinet sat at the back, almost hidden behind a stack of old fishing rods and broken toys. His heart skipped as he approached it. It was a cabinet he recognized, one that used to sit in the garage next to the red toolbox. He pulled open the broken lock, revealing a few faded papers and miscellaneous items. Buried underneath it all was a yellow envelope, sealed tightly with tape. Ethan's name was scrawled on the front in uneven strokes. His breath caught in his throat. This was the moment he had been waiting for. He grabbed the envelope and carefully peeled it open. Inside, there were 2 sheets of paper, and as he read the first one, his chest tightened. It was from Martin. The letter was brief but damning. It spoke of Scout's behavior after the accident, how the dog became unmanageable, how he refused to eat, and how his behavior deteriorated. The letter mentioned that they had made the decision to send Scout to a behavioral facility near Buckley, but there was no mention of where, no details. Ethan's fingers shook as he read the next line. "We hoped someone would adopt him. I didn't want you to know. You were dealing with enough." The last sentence hit him like a punch to the gut. Someone lied to me. My family lied to me. The weight of betrayal settled heavily on his shoulders. Ethan stumbled backward, clutching the letter. The truth was more painful than he could have imagined. Scout hadn't run away. He had been sent away, hidden, erased from his life. And what made it worse, Martin had never bothered to check if Scout had made it to the facility. They had just let him disappear. The more Ethan learned, the more he realized that the truth about Scout's disappearance was tangled in a web of lies and hidden decisions made by his family. The letter from Martin had been a crucial piece of the puzzle, but it was only the beginning. As the days went on, Ethan's frustration grew, and his anger boiled over. One afternoon, Ethan drove to the old family storage unit. He had been avoiding it, and sure of what he might find. The large, rusted metal door creaked as he pushed it open, the smell of dust and decay hitting him immediately. It had been years since he'd last set foot inside. As he rummaged through old boxes filled with forgotten relics, his fingers brushed against something cold and metallic. It was a small, dented green cabinet that had once sat beside his father's workbench. He opened it slowly, knowing he was about to unearth something significant inside. Buried under layers of old receipts and papers was a yellow envelope. It had his name on it, written in sharp and even strokes. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. This wasn't his handwriting. It wasn't his father's either. It was Martin's. His hands shook as he peeled back the tape sealing the envelope. Inside were 2 sheets of paper, both written in a detached, almost mechanical style. The first page detailed what had happened to Scout after the crash. Ethan's stomach lurched as he read the words. After the accident, Scout became unmanageable. We made the decision to transfer him to a behavioral facility near Buckley that handled trauma cases. We hoped someone would adopt him. The second page, however, sent a shiver down his spine. It was a short note, written in a hurried, almost apologetic tone. "I never checked to see if he made it. You were dealing with enough. I didn't want to add to your pain." Ethan sat back against the dusty boxes, the weight of the words pressing heavily on him. His uncle had made the decision to send Scout away, to remove him from the picture entirely. But the betrayal wasn't just in the act itself, it was in the fact that no one had told Ethan the truth. Scout had been erased from the narrative of his life, just like the pieces of his past that had been buried under family secrets. The silence between Ethan and Scout in the lodge that night felt different. It wasn't just the quiet of a reunion. It was the silence of a bond that had been broken, a silence filled with the sting of years lost. Ethan whispered into the room, more to himself than the dog. "I didn't know. I swear, I didn't know." Scott's eyes didn't leave him, as though the dog understood that. For the first time in years, Ethan was finally beginning to understand the depth of the betrayal. The days following Ethan's discovery in the storage unit were filled with a quiet intensity. The truth was out in the open, and though it was a bitter pill to swallow, it was the only way forward. Ethan could no longer let the shadows of the past control him. He couldn't undo the mistakes of his family, but he could choose how to move forward from here. He knew the next step was clear. To bring the truth to light. The evidence Scout's journey, the family's lies was damning, and it wasn't something he could let remain hidden. Ethan contacted the sheriff's office, providing them with the letter, the details of Scout's treatment, and the long-held secrets that had been buried. There was no dramatic confrontation, no violent outburst. The quiet, steady way he presented everything made it clear that Ethan wasn't seeking revenge, only closure. the investigation into his family's business dealings, including the cover-up of the crash and the mistreatment of Scout, quickly gained momentum. Slowly, the wheels of justice began to turn as the truth unraveled. Ethan couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. The pain of the past was being addressed, not just for him, but for Scout too. And as he sat in the lodge, watching the dog rest quietly by his side, Ethan knew that justice was about to be served, not just for his parents, but for all the years Scout had spent waiting in silence. It wasn't an ending. It was the beginning of something new, something that would finally allow Ethan and Scout to heal together. As the investigation into the family's dealings and the truth behind the accident gained ground, Ethan found himself reflecting on everything he had learned. The road to redemption wasn't just about confronting the wrongs of the past, it was about forgiving himself. All these years, he had carried a weight of unanswered questions, unresolved grief, and misplaced guilt. But now, with the truth finally coming to light, the burden seemed to lift. Little by little, Scout, the dog who had once been a symbol of betrayal and abandonment, was now a symbol of something deeper: loyalty, patience, and the power of survival. The bond between Ethan and Scout, which had been broken for so long, was slowly being rebuilt. Each quiet moment they shared, whether it was a walk through the woods or just sitting together in the warmth of the lodge, felt like a small victory. Ethan wasn't the same person who had arrived in Jackson all those days ago. He was no longer running from his past or trying to escape the pain. He had confronted it head-on, and now he was starting to build a future. Piece by piece, his family's reputation would eventually be restored, and those responsible for the lies would face justice. But for Ethan and Scout, it wasn't about punishment. It was about healing. The truth had set them both free in a way they never expected. Ethan had finally found peace, not in answers, but in the quiet presence of a dog who had never given up on him. Months passed since the dust had settled, and Jackson began to feel like a different place for Ethan. The town, once a place of sorrow and buried secrets, had started to feel like home again. The investigation into the family's past was still ongoing, but the weight of it no longer consumed him. Instead, Ethan found himself embracing the simple moments that had once been overshadowed by pain: morning walks through the fog, evenings with Scout resting by the fire, and quiet conversations with people who remembered the town as it once was. Ethan had moved into a small house on the outskirts of town, near the edge of a forest where the trees whispered in the wind. It was a place where he could breathe again, free from the ghosts of his past. He kept to himself mostly, with Scout as his constant companion. The dog's health had improved, and their bond grew stronger with each passing day. The world outside had slowed, the chaos of the past finally subsiding. On long walks with Scout by his side, Ethan no longer felt the need to look back. He had finally come to terms with everything: the loss, the betrayal, the years spent in silence. The weight of the past had lifted, leaving only the present and the future, both of which felt full of possibility. The once quiet pain in his chest had been replaced with a quiet peace, a peace that had been earned through forgiveness, patience, and the loyalty of a dog who had waited all these years for his return. Ethan sat on the porch of his new home, watching the sun dip behind the mountain range, painting the sky with soft hues of orange and purple. The air was cool, and the quiet rustling of leaves in the trees was all that broke the stillness. Scout lay by his side, head resting on his paws, content in the peace that surrounded them. For the first time in a long time, Ethan didn't feel the need to rush or escape. There was no business to attend to, no unresolved grief, knowing that his insides. This was a new chapter. He could feel it in the rhythm of his life, the simplicity of it. Every morning was a fresh start. Each day brought with it the chance to build something real. something grounded. Ethan had no illusions about what the future held. But for the first time, he wasn't afraid of it. The past was no longer a shadow hanging over him. It had been replaced by the quiet joy of knowing that he had faced it and walked through the storm. Scout stirred. Lifting his head, and his eyes met Ethan's, there was an understanding between them now. A silent acknowledgement that they had both endured hardship but had found a way forward. They were no longer bound by the past, but were instead free to chart their own course. Ethan smiled softly, leaning back in his chair. "We've got this, old friend," he whispered. And as the stars began to appear above, he knew that the road ahead, while uncertain, was theirs to walk together. As the weeks passed, the weight of everything that had happened settled into something quiet and final. But one question lingered in Ethan's mind: why had Scout never given up on him? The dog had waited all these years, through so much pain and silence. Could Scout, even in his old age, have known something that Ethan had not? Perhaps it wasn't just loyalty that kept him alive all those years, but a deeper, unspoken promise to Ethan. Sitting on the porch one evening, with Scout's head resting in his lap, Ethan wondered if the dog had always known that one day Ethan would come back.